My name is Megan Harrison and I am 25 years old. I never believed that coming home from my first real business trip, the kind with a 7-figure proposal and a room full of executives waiting to judge, would feel like stepping into a nightmare I could touch. I stepped out of the rideshare with a smile still warm on my face and a carry-on full of small gifts I had chosen with care. A silk scarf for my mother because she used to love them when laughter lived in our kitchen, a sleek pen for my sister because she signs contracts like they're sword strokes, and craft beers for my brothers because they always acted like they knew something I didn't. The Chicago afternoon had that scrubbed clean look it gets after days of rain, puddles drying into pale mirrors on the asphalt, sun lying gently across hedges, children's voices bouncing in the air. And then I saw them. A row of black garbage bags lined up at our front gate like a procession of plastic tombstones. They bulged, knotted tight, each one the size of a swallowed memory. My life, pressed down, twisted, tied, and set out like trash. My mother stood behind them with her arms crossed. Sandra Harrison, who used to iron my kindergarten drawings to the fridge like fragile flags, now guarding a barricade of hefty bags as if they were proof that she'd finally won. To her left and right, stationed as neatly as bookends, were my siblings, Jackson, Natalie, and Kevin, faces blank, back straight, mouths arranged into the polite lines people use when they've already decided you don't count. The smile slid off my face without asking permission. My suitcase handle went slick in my palm. A robin landed on the mailbox and then thought better of it, wings beating back into a safer sky. "What is this?" I asked. My voice sounded like it had come from the other side of the street. My mother didn't move. The spring light put a thread of silver in her hair I hadn't noticed before. "Your things are packed," she said. "You're 25, Megan. It's time for you to leave." The sentence cut so cleanly that for a second I felt nothing at all, like when a sharp blade is too sharp to hurt. The reaction came a beat later. Heat behind my eyes, cold in my fingertips, breath skipping as if the world had missed a step. Jackson watched me like a patient coming out of anesthesia. Natalie checked her watch, the face winking. Kevin looked at the ground, then away from it as if it had betrayed him. None of them reached for my suitcase. No one said welcome home. "Before I tell you the rest, do one small thing for me because it will help me keep going. Tell me where you're watching from. Hit like if you believe no one should find their entire life knotted into trash bags by the people who raised them. And subscribe if you want to hear how a person rebuilds from a front yard full of plastic grief. I'm Megan, and this is the story of how the day I was thrown out became the day I stopped asking permission to exist. I grew up as the youngest of 4 in this very house. A simple 2-story place in a suburb that measured worth in lawns mowed straight and report cards framed. My father died when I was 7, and grief reshaped my family like water slowly changing a stone. My siblings were already halfway to being adults when he went. Jackson 18, Natalie 16, Kevin 14. People with whole albums of memories. I had fragments. The way his hand dwarfed mine when we crossed the parking lot, the scratch of his beard when he kissed my forehead, the low tumble of his laugh under the sound of the TV. After he was gone, the warmth in our kitchen calcified into rules. The mother who once burned pancakes and laughed about it learned to love with a checklist. "I gave up everything for you kids," Sandra would say as regularly as the evening news. "The least you could do is..." The ending changed. "Clean the porch, keep your voice down, choose a major I can respect." But the punctuation never did. I learned the grammar of her affection the way you learn traffic signals. Green if you obey, red if you don't, a long yellow for every time I hesitated. Jackson became a surgeon, and his pictures with white coats and conference badges bloomed on the mantle. Natalie learned to end fights with paragraphs. Kevin built bridges or something like them, and our mother could point to him on a map and say, "Look what I made." I studied marketing. In this family's language, that sounded like I had chosen to juggle instead of study medicine. I wasn't failing by any metric out in the world. Entry-level job at a fast-rising startup, projects with real budgets, co-workers who asked for my ideas first. But at our Sunday table I might as well have stood up and announced I had decided to be a cloud. "When will you get a real job?" Mom would ask between the salad and the roast, a question that pretended to be curious and managed to be a verdict. Natalie was already making 6 figures by your age. I was an adult that could drive across states, negotiate timelines, pay bills. And yet I was also the child whose opinions could be shushed with a raised eyebrow. Jackson would pat my shoulder as if I were a deserving but disappointing resident. "You'll understand when you have more experience," he'd say. My hands would fold themselves into fists under the table where no one had to see. I stayed at home after college because Chicago rent is not a rumor. It's a wall. Mom said, family supports family, and I believed her. I paid rent, contributed to groceries, took the night shift with chores that never end. Dishes, laundry, the mysterious migration of dust. I drove her to appointments, decoded her phone when it forgot its own password, listened to the long list of neighbors who had failed to mow correctly or wave with sufficient enthusiasm. In our house, love meant labor and gratitude was best performed silently. When our firm landed a massive client, I was given the kind of assignment people tuck into their resumes for years. A presentation in New York. A room that mattered. Slides I had built, strategy one believed in, numbers that didn't just sing, they promised. I rehearsed until I could deliver the pitch in my sleep, then rehearsed again because dreams can't be trusted. The night before I left, I told Mom I'd be back late Friday. She didn't look up from her phone. Fine, she said. Jackson and Natalie are bringing the kids on Saturday. Be here to help. New York said yes. They loved the work. The budget cleared 7 figures. My boss lifted a glass and told me what I had wanted to hear for years. You have real talent, Megan. Leadership suits you. On the flight home, I tried not to imagine the future too loudly, but hope is a noisy animal. I pictured my family listening to me. I pictured my mother's face softening in a way I hadn't seen since I was small. I bought gifts in an airport boutique as if objects could be bridges. Scarf, pen, beer. I texted Mom that I'd landed and got silence back, which wasn't unusual, so I didn't panic. Halfway home, Jackson called and said, "We need to talk when you arrive." His voice clipped like a doctor about to deliver a diagnosis. Is someone sick? I asked. Just get here. He hung up and left me to conduct my own fear. And then I arrived. The black bags. The 4 of them. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're already on the wrong side of the door. Your things are packed, my mother said, as if we had agreed to this on a calendar. You're 25. It's time. We didn't discuss this, I said, the sentence unraveling as it left me. I don't have a place yet. I just got back. We all managed right after college, Natalie said without looking at me, checking her reflection in her phone screen like a verdict. It's called being an adult. With cosigns and help, I answered, feeling the old heat rise. With salaries triple mine. With a cheering section, not an eviction committee. Excuses, Kevin said, and still wouldn't meet my eyes. I've been hinting for months, my mother added, tightening her arms. You chose not to hear it. Hints aren't notice, I said louder than I meant to. You don't ambush family. You talk. Jackson stepped forward 1 measured inch. Don't raise your voice to Mom. The absurdity of being lectured about tone while my life sat in sacks made my breath do a small, bitter laugh. Over the fence, Mr. Patel pretended to adjust a trellis and pretended not to watch. A dog 2 houses down barked at a world that didn't answer. Is this about the house? I asked finally, because some truths knock politely and some bang. I had overheard Natalie saying the market was hot. I had heard the word offer in the kitchen and watched my mother close the laptop lid like a secret. A muscle flickered in Mom's cheek, then went still. My finances aren't your concern. They are when your choices make me homeless with no notice. The word homeless tasted like I had stolen it. Dad's will, he left the house to all of us. I remember the lawyer saying it. I might have been 7, but I remember. Natalie's gaze sharpened, the way it does when she hears a word that might ruin someone. Kevin shifted in a way that made a small apology of his shoes. Jackson's jaw stayed set to doctor. No one said I was wrong. No one said I was right. They stayed perfectly still and let the question wear itself out. You'd sue your own mother? Jackson asked, not surprised, just disapproving. You'd disinherit your daughter? I asked back, and the air between us changed temperature. We stood there in a tableau of manners while the truth walked circles around us. The bags were not an accident. The timing was not an accident. They had chosen a day I was gone to erase a room I had slept in for 25 years. To turn my drawers into knots and my books into black plastic. Saying anything else would have been theater. Let me inside to sort, I said finally, practical because fire only burns so long. You didn't pack this. You threw this. There are important things mixed with shirts I don't wear. Everything is there, my mother said, and looked past me like the conversation had already ended. Something inside me, something that had spent years obeying and apologizing, stood up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even angry. It was done. "How dare you?" I said, not as a question but as a quiet inventory. "How dare you do this and call it love? How dare you call this responsibility?" "Dramatic," Natalie murmured, because there is always a word for a woman with feelings. "Cowardly," I said and didn't look away. "That's the word for packing a daughter's life in trash bags when she is out of town." Kevin flinched like the word had landed on him. For a second I saw the brother who used to push me on swings and laugh like we were the same size. Then he smoothed his face back into the family expression and the second passed. I loaded the bags into my car one by one. They were heavier than I expected, and not just because of books. A neighbor I barely knew said my name softly and then didn't finish the sentence. I was grateful for the silence. When the car was full, I shut the hatch and turned back to them. They stood in a line, a portrait of order. I thought of the gifts in my carry-on and laughed once, because irony isn't funny when it's yours. "I just landed the biggest client our firm has ever had," I said. "I was going to tell you. I thought you might be proud." Jackson's mouth twitched and held. Natalie looked away. Kevin's throat moved. My mother blinked as if something had stung her eye. No one said congratulations. I got into the driver's seat and set my hands on the wheel. For a moment I couldn't find the keyhole because tears make everything double. When the engine finally caught, I looked at them one more time. "I hope the money is worth it," I said, and it came out flatter than I meant, like a piece of paper sliding under a door. I drove away from the last version of my life I had left. The first place I went was nowhere. I drove loops around streets I knew so well I could have walked them blindfolded. The car smelled like plastic and old coffee. The bags crackled when I turned. I tried Zoe twice. My college roommate, the person who had once talked me through a flu at 3 a.m., but the call didn't go through, and then it did. "Are you okay?" she asked before hello could finish. "No," I said, which was new. I had practiced okay for years. I told her enough for her to say, "Come here now. Tyler's home. We've got the spare room. We'll figure the rest out later." I parked in front of Zoe and Tyler's building and sat with my forehead against the steering wheel until the world stopped doubling. Tyler jogged down the steps in gym shorts and an old concert tee, like the kindest emergency response I'd ever seen. They didn't ask for a speech. They lifted bags, they made trips, they cleared a desk with 4 casual movements, they found an extra set of sheets that didn't match and called it charming. I stood in their doorway and felt like a flood survivor who had been handed a towel and a name. That first night I stared at the ceiling of a room that wasn't mine and listened to the numb hum of a building that didn't know me yet. My phone trembled off and on with text. I let them pile up until Zoe said, "You need to read them once and then we'll put your phone in a drawer." We scrolled together. Mom said I was overreacting. Jackson said adults don't make scenes. Natalie sent apartment listings that required first, last deposit, and a spotless history I didn't have. Kevin wrote, "I'm sorry about the method." The method? As if the problem were choreography. "This is abuse," Tyler said in the tone of a person stating a weather fact. "Emotional abuse. Nobody does this to a daughter they respect." The word abuse found a place to sit right behind my sternum and refused to move. I slept in halves. I woke with my jaw tight. In the morning, Zoe put coffee into my hand and said, "We're going to make a plan." The plan had columns. Housing. Money. Work. Safety. The part of my brain that writes marketing calendars and loves boxes to check woke up for the first time since the driveway and said, "We know how to do this." During lunch breaks I scrolled listings and learned the math of independence the hard way. Income 3 times the rent, deposits large enough to knock the air out of you, references from landlords I didn't have, a credit score that would be judged like a report card. My savings, which had looked substantial when I lived at home, shrunk under the glare of first and last month's reality. After 10 days of searching I found a studio the size of a long breath with peeling paint, a refrigerator that made a noise like it remembered a better life, and a landlord willing to accept a larger security deposit instead of history. It wasn't pretty. It was possible. Moving day looked like a puzzle dumped in a smaller box. My life, previously sorted into bedrooms and hallways and a garage with shelves, now had to become a single room with a window that faced a brick wall and still somehow found light. I owned no plates, no towels, no broom, no pan that could forgive an egg. Zoe said, "We're having a housewarming," and texted 4 friends with the speed of someone ordering an ambulance. They arrived with mismatched chairs, a second-hand table, a set of bowls with different patterns that looked like a conversation, A lamp that decided to work if you spoke to it kindly. We ate pizza on paper plates and someone said, "It's not much," and Amber corrected, "It's a beginning." I went to sleep that night in a space that made no promises and still felt like a promise. At work I was a version of myself I recognized. I arrived early with my laptop open before the lights warmed to full. I finished the New York deliverables so cleanly that even my inner critic couldn't find a smear. My boss stopped at my desk 2 weeks later and said, "You've been on fire." I almost told him it was because my life was burning down. Instead I said, "Thank you," and meant it. He offered me a promotion, lead for the digital team, and a raise that didn't fix everything but let me breathe every other Wednesday. The word yes felt like stepping onto a firm surface in a room you thought was a lake. Night was harder. I woke at small hours with my heart sprinting, convinced someone was packing my life while I slept. I jumped at sounds in the hallway that were just elevators telling jokes to themselves. Zoe said, "Therapy," like a prayer she knew would work eventually. I said, "Insurance," like a complaint. She sat with me while I found a therapist who took my plan and specialized in people whose families treat control like love. In our first session I made jokes with perfect timing. In our second I cried so steadily I forgot to apologize. She gave me names for things: scapegoating, triangulation, conditional affection. She said, "What they did would be questionable even if you were a stranger renting a room. Doing it to a daughter while she's away is not a misunderstanding. It's harm." The sentence landed and didn't bounce. I learned new skills the way you learn to walk on a ship. Bent knees, hands-free. I fixed a leaking faucet by watching a video 3 times and swearing at the right moment. I learned which grocery store sold eggs for less if you didn't look them in the eye and which bus came close to on time. I wrote every expense down until the numbers told me where I had lied to myself. Independence is not a montage, it's a spreadsheet. 3 months after the driveway I saw Kevin at a coffee shop downtown, sunlight threading through the window like it had decided to be kind. We froze, then pretended we hadn't, then said hello. "You look good," he said, which is what people say when they don't know which apology to start with. "How are you?" "Working a lot," I said. "I got promoted." He nodded like that matched the math in his head and then offered Mom's name as if it were a bridge between us. "She wants you to come to Sunday dinner." "To do what?" I asked. "To pretend it didn't happen?" He tried to smile, failed, tried again. "To talk." "Is she sorry?" The silence that followed was a shape that fit both our hands. "She wants it to go back to normal," he said finally. "Normal is what broke me," I said, and meant it without heat. I walked home with coffee cooling in my hand and allowed myself to feel both the weight of what I had lost and the precise, unexpected lightness of not needing to ask for anyone's permission to arrange my own day. Some afternoons I felt like a person who had climbed out of a window without knowing there was a fire. Other days I felt the smoke in my lungs. Both were true. Both were survivable. In the weeks that followed, small changes felt like revolutions. I proposed bolder ideas at work because nobody could send me to my room if I was wrong. I bought a yellow pillow for the second-hand couch because my mother hated yellow. The room glowed like a yes. I took my camera out on Saturdays and let the city teach me to see again. Rust on railings like galaxies, kids jumping rope in perfect rhythm, a woman in a red coat moving through a gray block like a story refusing to be shortened. I joined a book club where nobody asked me when I would switch to a respectable career. I said no to plans that felt like obligations in disguise and yes to ones that felt like oxygen. And yet, every time I passed a row of black trash bags on the curb, my throat tightened. Every time I heard the zip of plastic, my hands remembered the driveway. Trauma hides in the common noises. My therapist said healing is teaching your body that the present is not the past, one Tuesday at a time. Some Tuesdays I believed her. One Saturday in late spring, my landlord replaced the refrigerator with one that didn't complain about existing. He hauled the old one out while whistling and said, "You're lucky. These newer models are quieter." I laughed like a person who had just been given silence as a gift and understood exactly how valuable it was. I found myself thinking often of the girl I had been before the driveway. The one who tried to make herself smaller at Sunday dinners. The one who arrived at milestones and then hid them in her pocket until someone asked, which no one did. If I could talk to her now, I would say, "You were never the problem. You were the unfinished story they didn't have the patience to read." On a humid evening when the light sat on the street like a held breath, I took the scarf I had bought for my mother out of the gift bag and tied it around my own neck. In the mirror, I looked like a woman who had finally realized the only permission slip she needed had her own signature on it. I walked to the corner store to buy milk and came home with basil because it smelled like possibility. I put it on the windowsill and it decided to live. That night I slept through until morning for the first time. When I woke, the city sounded like a city instead of a threat. Somewhere a siren wrote a diagonal line through the air and then let it go. I made coffee in a chipped mug I had bought for $1 and thought, this is enough for now. Enough is a radical thing when you've been trained to chase the moving target of someone else's approval. I didn't answer my mother's messages. I didn't block her either. I let them arrive and stack themselves like unsent letters until they felt less like emergencies and more like weather. Once she wrote, "Where did I go wrong with you?" I typed, "You confused control with love." I deleted it. I typed, "You went wrong where your mother went wrong with you." I deleted that too. I closed the app and watered the basil. When people asked about my family, I said, "It's complicated," and let the conversation move me to a safer shore. I wasn't ready to carry the weight of anyone's shock or advice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some stories have to be told at your pace or they aren't really yours. And still, there are moments that ask for answers. One came in the grocery store aisle when I nearly collided with Natalie. She looked exactly like herself, sharp, impeccable, efficient, and exactly nothing like the sister who used to braid my hair too tight and then fix it. We both stopped. We both made the face people make when a ghost turns out to be a person. "Megan," she said. Her voice had the texture of someone walking on gravel in heels. "Natalie." We stood between cereal and cereal. Somewhere a child asked for a brand with a cartoon astronaut and a mother said maybe. Natalie picked up a box she didn't need and put it down. "Are you okay?" she asked finally, which was either a trap or a blessing. "I'm working." I moved. "I'm fine," I said, because fine is a raft. "Good," she said and looked at the shelves like they might help. "Mom wants to talk to you." "Mom wants a lot of things," I said. "What does she want to give?" Natalie blinked like the question had too much light. "She wants it to be like before." "Before is a place we can't drive to," I said and pushed my cart forward. She let me go without a scene, which was its own kind of shock. Back home, I sat on the floor among books that didn't match their shelves yet and wrote 3 words on a sticky note. "Boundaries are love." I put it on the wall where I put my keys so I would see it twice a day and maybe believe it by August. The weeks bent toward summer. My team launched the New York campaign and the metrics leapt the way you hope they will when you argue in conference rooms about headlines and color palettes and the deep math of attention. RCO said, 40% engagement lift, and I felt something inside me quietly stand up straighter. I celebrated by buying real plates. They were white and heavy and made even a sandwich feel like I had made a choice on purpose. I wish I could tell you that this is where forgiveness started, tidy as a lesson. It isn't. What started here was competence. I got competent at my life. The basil grew leaves faster than I could use them. I learned to chop and freeze. A friend taught me to patch a small hole in the wall and I patched it, then painted over it, and the paint dried and no one scolded me for the color. I kept a list on my phone titled Things I Can Do Now and added, change a tire with help, say no without apologizing, sleep through sirens, ask for a raise. And I kept another list, more private, called Things I Will Never Accept Again. At the top, my life treated like trash because it is not convenient. The next line, love measured by obedience. I didn't know that writing these lists would be the map I needed. I only knew that the lists made me feel like a person drawing a door where there had only been a wall. On a day hanging exactly between spring and summer, I carried the last of the empty boxes down to recycling and stacked them in a neat, stubborn tower. An older woman sorting cans looked up and said, "New place?" I nodded. "It gets easier," she said, and I believed her because she said it like a person who had done math you can't see. I walked back upstairs and set my phone face down on the table. I stood in the middle of my one-room life and listened to it be quiet. For the first time since the driveway, I let my shoulders drop all the way. I looked at the door and understood that as long as I had a key, I had a say. That was enough to get me to the next day. And if you're still with me, if you have felt the familiar electric sting of being told you are too much or not enough by the people who taught you to spell your name, know this. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person to be met. The beginning of meeting myself started here. In a room that didn't match, with a plant that insisted on thriving, with a life that I was finally allowed to assemble piece by stubborn piece. The day they packed my history into black plastic was the day I learned how to write my future in my own handwriting. Megan Harrison stood at the window of the dingy motel, watching cars slide past on the wet asphalt below. Each set of headlights cut across the curtains like flash photography at a crime scene, momentary bursts of light exposing how empty her room truly was. The carpet smelled of mildew, the lamps buzzed with faulty wiring, and the sheets itched with the memory of too many strangers. It was not a home. It was a holding cell. And yet it was all she had. The first nights stretched like centuries. She lay awake, listening to the occasional siren, to voices arguing outside, to footsteps stomping past her door. The shadows kept her company. Every creak of the mattress reminded her how temporary her life had become. In the silence, her thoughts screamed, "They didn't just push you out, Megan. They erased you." Work was the only anchor she had left. Each morning she opened her laptop on the motel desk, balancing it carefully on a wobbling surface scarred with cigarette burns. The glow of the screen steadied her nerves. For a few hours she could pretend she still belonged to a world that valued her. Emails, video calls, and project briefs gave her the illusion of stability. But the moment the laptop closed, reality crashed down. She was homeless, abandoned, left to survive on scraps. The promotion her boss had hinted at replayed in her head like a lifeline. She clung to those words, "I'll back you." They were oxygen in an environment where her family had stolen every breath. Still, self-doubt gnawed at her. She wondered if the promotion was offered out of pity. Did he see her as weak, fragile, broken? He hated the thought. She wanted to be seen as strong, unstoppable, someone who didn't crumble even when her world collapsed. One evening, as she sat at the tiny desk scribbling figures on a notepad, she realized her savings would last only weeks if she stayed in the motel. Panic set in. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to think. Rent, deposits, furniture, groceries. It was impossible. And all the while her siblings thrived in the house she once called home. The unfairness burned like acid. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kevin. "Don't forget about the engagement party." Megan stared at the text in disbelief. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an invitation to celebrate his happiness while she rotted in obscurity. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "I won't be there." She deleted it. Typed again, "Leave me alone." Deleted that too. Finally, she powered off the phone entirely. Isolation grew heavier. Friends reached out less often, unsure of what to say. Megan avoided their questions anyway, too ashamed to admit where she was staying. She turned down coffee dates and dinners, making excuses about work. In truth, she was terrified someone would see her walking back into the motel and judge her. Pride, once her armor, had become her prison. On the fifth night, something inside her broke. She sat on the floor, surrounded by half-open garbage bags of her belongings, clutching the cracked graduation photo frame. Her face in the picture smiled back at her, full of hope and ambition. She whispered to it as though to her past self, "I don't know if I can do this." The silence answered. For the first time she admitted she was scared, not just of failing but of disappearing. But fear soon mutated into something sharper, defiance. If her family thought she was disposable, she would prove them wrong. She would build a life so strong, so undeniable, that they could never again look down on her. That night she made a promise. Not just to survive but to thrive. Not just to live but to rise. The very next morning she walked into her office downtown. Her boss looked up in surprise as she strode to his desk. "I want the management role," she said firmly. He raised an eyebrow, impressed by her sudden steel. "Then fight for it," he replied. And fight she did. She worked later than anyone else, volunteered for the hardest assignments, and delivered results that left colleagues speechless. She studied leadership courses online from her motel room, highlighting paragraphs while sirens blared outside. She networked relentlessly, attending conferences where no one knew. She returned to a rented room at night. Each success was a brick in the foundation of her new life. Yet even as her professional star rose, shadows lingered. Nights were haunted by dreams of her family's betrayal. She would see her mother's cold eyes, hear Natalie's cruel laugh, feel Jackson brushing past her with indifference. She woke in cold sweats, fists clenched, tears staining her pillow. The wounds had not healed. They had simply been buried under ambition. 2 months passed. The motel clerk had grown used to her, greeting her with a nod each evening. She barely noticed anymore. The shame was fading. What replaced it was hunger. Not for food but for victory. For vindication. For justice. She began to write in a journal each night, pouring out her rage. On one page she scribbled in heavy ink, "They will regret underestimating me." The engagement party came and went. Photos appeared online, her siblings dressed in finery, glasses raised, smiles broad. Meghan stared at the images on her laptop, fury building in her chest. They celebrated while she scraped by and they didn't care. That night she slammed the laptop shut so hard it nearly cracked. "This isn't over," she whispered into the darkness. Meghan's world shifted again the morning she received the email. "Congratulations. You've been promoted to project manager." She read it 3 times, hardly believing the words. Her hands shook as she clutched her phone, the motel's buzzing neon light flickering above her. The title was more than a raise. It was recognition, validation. A weapon against every lie her family had told her. That day she dressed in her sharpest blazer, her confidence radiating as she walked through the office doors. Colleagues congratulated her with smiles, some masking envy. Meghan absorbed it all like sunlight, every "well done," a crack in the chains her family had wrapped around her self-worth. Yet in the quiet moments between meetings, she still felt the hollow echo of their betrayal. With the promotion came a bigger paycheck, and soon Meghan left the motel for a modest apartment. It wasn't luxurious, just 2 small rooms with squeaky floors and thin walls, but it was hers. The first night she stood in the kitchen eating instant noodles straight from the pot, grinning. For the first time in weeks she slept soundly, untroubled by the smell of damp carpets or the sound of strangers outside her door. But even as her life stabilized, her family's shadows stretched long. One evening, as she sorted through paperwork, a letter arrived in her mailbox. The handwriting made her stomach tighten. It was her mother's. With trembling hands she opened it. "Meghan, we heard about your promotion. Congratulations. I know things were said in anger, but family should stick together. Perhaps we can put the past behind us. Kevin's wedding is coming soon and it would mean a lot if you came. Love, Mom." Meghan laughed bitterly. Family should stick together? The words felt like poison. They hadn't cared when they stuffed her life into trash bags. They hadn't cared when she slept in a motel. And now, because she was rising, they wanted her back in the fold. Still, the letter shook her. She paced her apartment, torn between rage and longing. A part of her still craved her mother's approval, the warmth she had chased since childhood. But another part of her, stronger now, recognized the manipulation. It wasn't love that drove them to reach out, it was convenience. They wanted her presence to polish their image, nothing more. She didn't reply. Instead, she buried herself deeper in work. The company entrusted her with a massive client project, one that could make or break her career. Meghan poured everything into it, late nights, early mornings, endless revisions. Her team looked to her for leadership and she delivered. For the first time she felt not just competent but powerful. Meanwhile, memories haunted her like ghosts. She would see a woman laughing with her daughter in a cafe and ache with jealousy. She would overhear coworkers talking about family dinners and feel the sting of absence. But rather than wallow, she funneled the pain into drive. Every pang of loss was fuel. Months passed. The project succeeded beyond expectation and Meghan's reputation soared. She was invited to speak at a leadership conference, her name suddenly circulating in circles she once thought unreachable. Standing on the stage addressing hundreds, she realized she had transformed. The timid girl who once whispered apologies to photographs was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by betrayal, sharpened by survival. Still, her family lingered. Social media showed Kevin's lavish wedding preparations. Natalie posted photos of shopping trips, spa days, luxury vacations, all financed by the family Meghan had once helped support. Each post was like salt in an open wound. The wedding day arrived. Though she had no intention of attending, Meghan found herself driving past the grand venue, watching from her car as guests in glittering attire filed inside. Laughter floated on the air, music throbbed from within. She sat in the shadows, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She imagined walking in, imagined every head turning, imagined the silence as they saw how radiant she had become. But she stayed outside. This was not her battle, not yet. Instead, she made another vow. One day they will face me. And on that day they will see what they threw away. Back at her apartment, Meghan began to plan. She started saving aggressively, investing in herself, building not just a career but an empire of independence. She read books on strategy, psychology, and negotiation. She learned how to wield influence, how to command respect. Slowly, deliberately, she crafted a new identity. Megan Harrison, the unstoppable force. Opportunities multiplied. She launched side projects, partnered with influential figures, and built a network that extended far beyond her office. Soon she was earning more than her siblings combined. Her bank account grew, her apartment transformed into a stylish sanctuary, and her confidence radiated like armor. But power without confrontation was hollow. She knew the time would come to face her family. And when it did, she would not beg for acceptance, she would command recognition. That moment arrived sooner than she expected. Her father fell ill and word spread quickly through distant relatives. Megan received a curt message from Natalie. "Dad's in the hospital. You should come." Her heart clenched. Memories of childhood, of him teaching her to ride a bike, of his rare smiles, warred with the memory of his cold silence as she was thrown out. After hours of pacing, she decided to go. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and despair. Her father lay pale against the sheets, machines beeping steadily. Her mother and siblings froze when Megan entered. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. "Megan," her mother said stiffly. "You came." "I came to see him," Megan replied, her voice steady. She approached the bed, looking down at the man who had once been her protector, then her judge, then her executioner. His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. For a moment, vulnerability flickered in them. "Made it," he whispered. "Yes," Megan said softly. "I made it. Without you." The words hung in the air like thunder. Her siblings shifted uncomfortably, her mother looked away. In that moment, Megan realized she no longer needed their approval. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the outcast, they were the ones desperate for her presence. She left the hospital with her head held high, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. For the first time she felt free, not because her family had changed but because she no longer needed them to. That night she wrote in her journal, "Betrayal made me. Strength saved me. I will never apologize for surviving." And as she closed the book, Megan knew her story was far from over. The battles ahead would be fierce, but she was ready. She was no longer the girl with her life in trash bags. She was Megan Harrison, unbroken, unyielding, unstoppable. My name is Megan Harrison, and by the time autumn pressed the first cold into the windows of my small apartment, I had learned how to live without waiting for permission. The city felt different now, less like a maze, more like a map I could read. I woke before my alarm most mornings, made coffee in the chipped mug I refused to replace, and watched the light move across the floorboards as if it were measuring the day on my behalf. At work, my calendar stayed full and my inbox stayed impatient, and yet I had room in my head again. The panic that once camped behind my ribs packed up and left for longer stretches at a time. I could feel a future forming, not as a fantasy I whispered to myself, but as a thing I was building with my own hands. The messages started on a Thursday. I was in a late meeting, halfway through walking a client through the logic of a multi-channel rollout, when my phone lit with a string of notifications I ignored on principle. After I stood by the elevator and scrolled. 10 from my mother. Then 20. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I had counted 32. They were uneven, accusations that turned into appeals, appeals that turned into demands, demands that collapsed into apologies so sudden they gave me emotional whiplash. "Where are you? Why won't you answer? We need to talk. I made a mistake. Please call me." The pace quickened as if each message could pull the previous one back from what it had said. When I set the phone down on the kitchen table that night, the total read 60. I didn't answer. Not immediately. I poured water for the basil on the windowsill, changed into a sweatshirt, and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. My brain, so recently my ally, started rehearsing disasters. Had she been hurt? Had something happened to my siblings? The part of me that had practiced detachment reminded me how often urgency was a tactic. Still, compassion is a habit I hadn't completely unlearned. The next morning I called the only brother who had shown cracks in the family armor. Kevin. "She lost everything," Kevin said, not bothering with the greeting you give to acquaintances. "Everything, Megan." His voice wobbled on the word like a step on a loose board. Everything turned out to be the house, the money from the sale, the the cushion that had been her reason for cleaning me out of a bedroom I had painted myself when I was 13. She had sold quickly to buyers who wanted immediate possession, then placed the proceeds with a man who introduced himself from the pulpit of a church she had attended twice. He called himself an advisor. He called her plan conservative and safe. Then he called no one again. By the time the police report was filed, there were more victims than chairs in the small station where she sat to give her statement. The numbers didn't just not add up. They had been stolen and spent like someone else's heir. Where is she now? I asked. A motel, he said, and the word rippled out through both of us, touching the same bruise in different bodies. She wants to stay with you. I pressed my thumb into the edge of the table until it hurt on purpose. That will not happen. Kevin didn't argue. He made a sound that might have been relief. I told her it wasn't reasonable to ask. The next day I agreed to meet Sandra at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. Neutral ground with a door I could use if I needed to leave. She arrived late, hair unbrushed in a way I had never seen, the expensive certainty she wore like a coat replaced by a sweater that didn't fit right. For a heartbeat I saw my mother as a person with edges softened by fear. Then I remembered the driveway. I remembered black plastic. Kept my coat on. Thank you for coming, she said, and her hands never left the coffee cup as if heat were the only currency she trusted. I didn't know if you would. You sent 60 messages, I said. It seemed unkind to pretend I hadn't seen them. He swallowed. I made mistakes. You did, I said, and let the silence hold the rest. She looked past me, one of her old tells when the words in front of her were too heavy. The money, she started then stopped. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was securing us. You secured a sale and an eviction, I said. You secured silence around a decision that changed my life without my participation. And then you secured a stranger with everything you had. Her mouth tightened. Do you know what it's like to carry 4 children alone? No, I said. Do you know what it's like to be one of those children and still be treated like a problem that needs to be solved by taking away her room while she's out of town? We went another round or two the way families do when history is the only script anyone knows. Accusation, defense, revision, appeal. Eventually the words got tired enough to let different ones try. I told her what I could offer. Help her find affordable senior housing, contribute a modest amount monthly for a time, drive her to 2 appointments while she got on the wait list for a longer-term place. I could not offer my apartment, my bed, my couch, my key, my peace. I would not offer those things to anyone who treated them as entitlements. So that's your idea of help, she said, half incredulous, half pleading. That's my boundary, I said. Help inside it is sustainable. Help outside it sets me on fire to keep you warm. We held each other's eyes for longer than we had since I was a teenager. She was the one who looked away first. When we stood to leave, she asked, "When do things go back to normal?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. They don't, I said. But maybe we can build something that works. We started building the slow way. I called 3 facilities and filled out forms that asked for information I had never imagined knowing about my mother. Income, debts, daily routines, medications. I sat on hold while a recorded voice informed me how valuable my call was. I put the date of the tour into my calendar and then moved it because a nurse had called in sick and the administrator had to cover the desk. On the day we finally walked through Pine Court, independent living with an option to add support, I watched my mother react to a studio that looked a lot like my first apartment. Small, but the light took its job seriously. The manager explained the meal plan and the bus schedule and the community room where a woman named Ruth ran a twice-weekly trivia game like a benevolent general. Sandra nodded, asked no questions, and then said very quietly, "It is smaller than I expected." "So was my first place," I said equally quietly. "You adapt." Paperwork followed paperwork. A background check that came back clean for both criminal records and anyone willing to vouch for a life. A waiting list that, miraculously and also because the world is full of people moving between versions of home, moved faster than the administrator had warned. When my mother signed the lease, her hand shook only once. She turned to me to ask about curtains and then stopped herself. "I suppose that's my decision," she said, with a wryness I recognized from a woman I had not met yet. I set up a small automatic transfer that would cover the gap between her fixed income and the cost of living there. I brought over 2 grocery bags the first week. Pantry basics, tea she liked, a jar of honey because sweetness felt medicinal. And then I went home to my own apartment and slept through the night for the first time since the 60 messages. Therapy shifted gears the same week. We stopped inventorying harm like auditors and started rebuilding like architects. My therapist slid the words generational patterns across the table toward me and asked me what they meant in my body. I said they meant a back that expected to be straightened by a scolding. I said they meant a throat that learned to hold 3 apologies for 1 inch of space. She nodded and said, "And what do boundaries feel like?" I said they felt like a key I kept in my own pocket. Work didn't pause for any of it. The campaign I had shepherded into the world hit its metrics like a kid who had discovered a sport she loved. We presented results to the leadership team on a Tuesday that smelled like rain, and when the CEO said, 41% lift, I felt the old ache in my chest replace itself with something that behaved like pride without the sharp edges. 2 weeks later, an email slid into my inbox that started with congratulations and ended with a title I read twice. Director of Digital Strategy. The raise would not make me bulletproof, but it would let me replace the couch with one that didn't pretend tiredness was a personality. I said yes. I bought flowers for my kitchen because the room looked like it wanted someone to make a good decision in it. Kevin texted that night, "Proud of you." It came without punctuation, which made it feel less like a performance and more like a message that had slipped through a tight place. We started meeting for coffee every other week in a shop that played music quietly enough you could hear regret form itself into sentences. He said, "I should have stood up for you," and then didn't ask me to make the guilt go away. I said, "I should have left sooner," and then didn't ask him to tell me I couldn't have. We both let the imperfectness of our timing be what it was. Natalie didn't text. She posted pictures of rooms that looked like catalogs and quotes that sounded like manifestos. And then 6 months into my mother's new address, she called. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it, and it got smaller when she said the word divorce. The marriage built in straight lines had split along a hairline crack neither of us had seen from the outside. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, and for a second the sister who used to braid my hair too tight and then fix it stood in the space between us. "We can meet," I said. "We can talk." We started with coffee at a different shop in a different neighborhood because neutrality helps. She didn't apologize in the grand way dramatic movies teach you to expect. She said, "I didn't understand," and then, "I think I do now," and sometimes that is the only door that opens. We walked through it like people learning to trust a floor. I bought a condo the following spring. Not the kind that appeared on the splashy pages Natalie liked to scroll, but a place with light that took you by the sleeve and a balcony big enough for herbs that would misbehave into being edible. I signed the stack of papers with a hand that didn't shake and took the key like it was a vowel I had been missing. The first night I slept on a mattress on the floor and woke to a shaft of sun laying itself across me like a promise. In the afternoon I hosted 6 friends who had become the family you meet when you stop trying to earn your first one. Zoe brought a plant I could not kill. Tyler installed a shelf without saying anything about my inability to find studs. Amber showed up with mismatched plates that somehow matched the room. We toasted with cheap champagne because expensive champagne tastes like someone else's idea. I kept writing. The journal pages had become a map and I didn't want to forget the way home. On a dare from myself I started posting short essays online about leaving and staying, about saying no and meaning it, about the days that stretch you like elastic and the days that shrink you like a sweater in hot water. People found the posts the way thirsty people find water in a place where signs point to mirages. They sent messages that began with "I thought it was just me" and ended with "thank you for naming it." I built a simple site and called it Fresh Start, not because starts are ever fresh but because we deserved to add new pages to the book we were handed. With the first bonus from the director title I set up a small fund. Nothing dramatic, just enough to help someone cover a security deposit or buy clothes for a first week at a job, or get 3 sessions with a therapist who actually listened. I named it after nobody on purpose. The form asked what the applicant needed. We sent money the week before holidays on purpose. The first thank you arrived as a photo of a set of keys in a hand with nail polish chipped from moving boxes. Under it, a line, "I didn't think I'd ever hold this." I cried in my kitchen and then laughed because my basil had finally started behaving like a bush. Sandra and I attended therapy together 3 times. The first session we performed. The second we argued. The third we said one new true thing each. She said, "My mother squeezed me smaller than she realized." "I squeezed you the same way." I said, "Your survival plan became my confinement." And then, "I am not applying for parole anymore." The therapist nodded like a person who knows that victory sometimes wears boring clothes. We stopped going not because anything had been fixed, but because the part that could be moved had been moved, and the rest would take 2 quiet women and an uncomfortable chair over the course of seasons. On a Sunday that felt like it had remembered how to be gentle, I drove Sandra to a park near Pine Court and we walked the flat path where geese had practiced their arrogance into a kind of comedy. She told me about Ruth's trivia empire and about a neighbor who baked too much and shared the overflow the way generosity sometimes does. She asked, "Do you ever miss it?" And I said, "Which it?" Because it is a small word for so many rooms. "The house," she said. "The noise of it. The way the door sounded." I thought about it carefully. "I miss the version of us I thought could happen there," I said. "Not the one we had." She nodded with a face that suggested she had been practicing nodding at reality. Jackson sent a holiday card with 3 children and a dog and the kind of smile that looks borrowed. We met once for a lunch that did what meetings do when one person isn't ready to be a person yet. It filled time. I decided I could love him from across a room. Not a punishment, not a reward. A boundary that kept us both from performing roles we were done with. In the second summer, I stood in my condo's small kitchen, now fully mine in the way repetition makes ownership, and realized I had stopped walking on eggshells even when no one was there to watch me walk. My voice didn't pitch itself to please a ghost. My shoulders didn't brace for the sentence that begins with "I gave up everything for you" and ends with a bill. Freedom is not a parade. It is a grocery list written without permission slips. I was on my balcony watering herbs when my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Mom's place is hosting a family day. He asked if you might come." No pressure. I pictured the community room and the bowl of mints that always tasted like eternity, the bulletin board with announcements in fonts that couldn't agree on who they were, the chairs that squeaked their opinions. I typed "I'll try" and left it unsent until the morning. Then I sent it. I showed up with a box of cookies from a bakery that behaved like a religion. When I walked in, Sandra smiled in a way that didn't ask anything from me. "You came," she said. "I did," I said. We ate cookies that were better than they needed to be and listened to Ruth run trivia like a benevolent storm. On the drive home, I realized I had not replayed the driveway scene in my head once during the visit. Healing sometimes announces itself by not announcing at all. A year later, I spoke at a conference in a hotel ballroom that held more chairs than seemed polite. The talk wasn't about my family, but it was about leadership that doesn't use people up. When the Q&A ended, a woman in a green blazer waited until the line thinned and then said, "How do you know when you're done trying with people who won't meet you in the middle?" I said, "When trying costs you the part of yourself you promised not to sell." And her eyes did the soft thing eyes do when a sentence lands. That night, back at the condo, I opened my journal and wrote a list titled "Things That Are True Now." 1. I can leave any room I enter. 2. I can make a room worth staying in. 3. I can love people I do not let near my keys. 4. I can be loved by people who met me after the worst day and chose me anyway. 5. I am not an unfinished version of my siblings. 6. I am not an apology. Months accumulate quietly when you live inside them. The condo gathered evidence that I existed. A small stain on the counter from a BlackBerry that tried to get away, a stack of library books, a scuff on the paint by the door where someone tall misjudged their bag. I hosted dinners where people argued about films and ended up washing dishes with their hands in my sink. I learned to cook one dish very well and then pretended to be surprised every time someone asked for the recipe. I took pictures again and learned how joy looks when you don't photograph it for proof. On the second anniversary of the driveway, I drove past the old house and felt nothing at all. The siding had been painted a different blue. A bicycle lay on the lawn like a kid had finally figured out a trick and run inside to report it. The air didn't thicken. My throat didn't close. I wished the house well like you wish a town well from a train. Someone else would learn there. Someone else would make a list of things they could do now. I drove on. In the fall, Natalie invited me to a parents' night at her kids' school because she had to work late and the timing didn't bend. I sat on a tiny chair and wrote my name on a sticker like everyone else and asked questions that made a teacher smile the way teachers smile when someone remembers they are people. On the way out, my niece slipped her hand into mine and said, "Aunt Megan, will you come to my art show?" I said yes like the word had been waiting for me in my mouth, and we made a plan to get ice cream that tasted the way colors look. And then, as if the universe likes narrative arcs even when we refuse to write them, I had dinner with Sandra in my kitchen on a Tuesday that had voted for rain. I kept the menu simple because complexity is not a love language. Midway through the meal, she set her fork down and said, "I am proud of you, Megan." I kept my face calm and let my heart do what hearts do when a thing happens late and still matters. "Not because of the job," she said, "though you are very good at it. I am proud of the way you refused to disappear even when I tried to make you smaller." "I'm sorry." I believed her exactly as far as that sentence reached. No further, no less. It didn't erase the driveway. It didn't demand we hold a ribbon cutting for a new relationship. It set one brick on top of another. We cleared the plates. We made tea. We said goodnight at the door as two adults with a history and a plan for the next time the calendar had room for each other. The day I signed the renewal on my condo's mortgage, I walked down the hall and unlocked my door and said out loud, "Home." Not the place where I learned how to be small. The place where I learned how to be accurate. I stood in the doorway and thought about the black bags lined at a gate that is now someone else's. I thought about keys and what they mean when you are the one who decides who gets copies. I thought about the people who had walked into this room and made it bigger by being in it. If you've stayed through this story, the driveways and the coffee shops and the small victories that stack into a life, then you already know what I learned more slowly than I wanted to. Sometimes the family you build from scratch holds you more gently than the one that taught you how to brace. Sometimes leaving is not an act of aggression but an act of precision. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do with a legacy is refuse to pass it forward. And this is where I leave you for now. At a table with a lamp that turns on when you ask it nicely, with a plant that has decided your window is a good address, with a phone that you can turn face down without fear. If this story gave you language for something you've been carrying, if it made a hard week feel less alone, then I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from. Leave your story in the comments so someone who needs your courage can borrow it. And if you're building your own life after a betrayal you didn't deserve, hit like and subscribe so we can keep walking each other home. I'm Megan Harrison, and this is the part of the story where the ending is not the end. It's the place where I keep choosing my own beginning.